Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we are joined with a special guest, Maggie Stenson, registered dietitian, and a lot of other acronyms there. But how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
So Maggie and I were chatting before. We're going to get into all things, I would imagine, eating disorder,
Yes.
and also just kind of your background and what brought you into the dietitian world and the things that you're passionate about. But what did get you down the road of becoming a dietitian?
Yeah, so I started, I guess I had a bit of a circuitous route. I started, my undergrad was in business management. And then when I was going into my senior year, I was like, okay, well, I need to find an internship for the summer. I need to start kind of getting some direction and career path, right? And then I just realized, like, I have no interest in business and I don't know what I'm doing with this degree. So then I was like, wait, I really enjoy nutrition. Maybe I can go into that. And then realized in order to really create a path and career path in that, I had to become a dietitian, which meant getting a degree in nutrition. So then I made like a 5-year plan of getting all my prereqs, went to grad school. Then in grad school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do as far as specialties go. And then we had someone come and speak to us specifically about eating disorders. And I was like, this is it. Like, it's super relational. It was the kind of, the philosophy around food was something I really connected with, just how they approached food. And I just felt like this is something I could be really passionate about and do every day, right? So then I started really focusing all of my internships my last year on eating disorders. Then luckily got a job in a treatment center out of grad school and worked in higher levels of care for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Then in 2020, went into outpatient. I've been doing outpatient for the last 5 years, but yes.
Went
It's quite a
into-
journey to get here.
Yeah, into outpatient right as COVID was hitting.
Yes,
huh?
so it was quite a time.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting time because it was, sadly, like we were talking about earlier, that big shift obviously triggered a lot of eating disorders or relapses. So it was a lot of people seeking care. And it was the time when we were pre-2020, we weren't doing a lot of virtual care.
Right.
Then all of a sudden everything was on Zoom. And so we're all adjusting to doing things on Zoom. So yeah, it was a wild time.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can attest to this too. It's not so different on Zoom with eating disorders, but it is. I miss sometimes with the clients that I have who struggle with this, some of the in-person assessments, like we were talking about, like we know when it's going to be a certain kind of day, and sometimes you can just feel the energy in the room. You know? But on Zoom, you kind of have to wait for them to present it to you. So you're walking maybe sometimes a little more into landmines.
Yes, that is true. I do notice it now, especially since I do Zoom and in person, kind of a mix. I notice, you just kind of have to, it's hard, you don't get the body language the same, and some physical assessment things I might do in person, noticing, types of clothing they're wearing or how they're carrying themselves, I can't pick up on as well in Zoom sessions. And then the other challenge with eating disorders and virtual sessions is, keeping up. We're usually monitoring weight, and we don't want them seeing the weight, so we have to get kind of creative on monitoring weight and make sure we're not manipulating the weights when they're getting them, if they're doing them on their own. So that is always another layer, so having to have a lot of wraparound when we come to that piece as well. So
Yeah, and as we get into this, we like the technical information. You and I understand the technical information, but we want to relay it to them. And so with this next question, as we get into it, we'll keep that in mind. But how would you describe maybe to somebody who tunes in who's never experienced an eating disorder, or maybe has one and don't know that they have it? What is an eating disorder?
Yeah, so I would say usually what I will just kind of notice with people or ask people to notice for themselves would be if you feel like majority of your day, majority of your time and energy, if you constantly have this voice or thought in your head that's focused on anxiety or stress or guilt around food or your body. So like it's totally normal if we're going throughout the day, and of course I'm going to wake up and think about breakfast. Maybe I feel kind of like I was overly full one time, and that might make me feel a little uncomfortable, or we naturally have maybe negative body image thoughts that come up and ebb and flow. So that's part of being human. But if it's feeling that your whole day is being dictated, or almost this soundtrack of negativity around food and body image is going on constantly, and you notice that being such a prevalent part of your life, that's one thing I'll ask people to notice. And another thing is if it's interfering with your ability to fully engage in your life. So let's say you're mood is kind of dictated on how you feel in your body that day, or if your mood's dictated on how you ate the day before, or if you're avoiding social situations because of food or how you're feeling in your body, that's a really good indicator. And then once people kind of notice that, because I think obviously, like you said, we can have that clinical piece that we'll dig into and we'll look at this, symptoms and all, behaviors and all of those things. But I think I always want people to notice for themselves how it's interfering with their life and how it's interfering with their mood, because that's so much more going to, I think, help them notice that internal motivation and why they would want to recover, right?
Yeah.
So, because like we talked about earlier, kind of in similarly to any type of addiction, I always tell my clients or my support people of clients, like their parents, when we think about the behaviors, especially with teens or with all patients, those behaviors are acting as a way to manage stress, manage anxiety, manage hard feelings. Yeah. So when we take those away, that can be really scary. So when especially for teens, are like, oh my gosh, you're gonna make me stop doing X, Y, and Z behaviors, and now I'm gonna have all these emotions come up, and that's gonna be really hard. So instead of just coming in and being like, hey, you've got to stop all these things, right, helping them notice, like, how is this also negatively affecting life, right? So they get a little bit of that buy-in as well.
Yeah. There's a piece of that where it's like, that's the old school doctor approach. Here's your problem. You need to stop, and here's what you need to do. And we just know now, without the buy-in, you're not going to get better for yourself. Maybe partly because you're not sure the desperation yet that it would cause, but also because you don't want to. And that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. We want to work with you to help you get there if that's what you want. I was talking with a client today around addictions, right? It's like, this is why interventions, or you remember that show Intervention?
Yeah.
This stuff doesn't work. It's like the addict isn't going to stop using drugs and alcohol if they don't want to stop doing it. And eating disorders are very much that way in their nuance. And a lot of times on the surface can seem a lot more complicated because of the different paths, right? Like binging or restricting and these kind of things.
Yeah. And like you said, and I oftentimes, it's not just a magical switch. I always tell them, you're not going to walk into my office and be like, hey, by the way, you should eat more food. And then they're all of a sudden going to be like, oh, well, thank goodness you told me. Now everything makes sense. The light's shining. So I tell them we're going to have to probably have the same conversation over and over again. And that's okay. Yeah. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a journey. And you can, and what I also talk a lot with my patients is that logical versus emotional mind. So I can tell them, like, in your logical mind, your body needs more food, or that the purging behaviors are not healthy for you, or X, Y, and Z. But your emotional mind is so attached to them, so those things aren't aligning right now, right? Yeah. So we have to just give ourselves grace of course I'm having to remind you every week, and we have to talk through why we're doing this every week, and that's okay. I always say, if I could just tell you to stop and you'd stop, we wouldn't keep seeing. I wouldn't have a job. My job would be done.
Well, I've always viewed the supplemental care, especially around these things, with a dietitian, very similarly to how I view 12-step recovery for an alcoholic. And in those rooms, they always say this program is for people who want it, not for people who need it. If it was for people who need it, those rooms would be standing room only anywhere you go ever. Yeah. And I think the shocking thing, especially in our society, and maybe you would agree with this, is eating disorder rooms would be just as filled.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because I think a lot of times, I'll notice it in my just everyday life, and notice, people are struggling, or even with, I think sometimes eating disorder behaviors that can be normalized as wellness culture, or kind of packaged in as wellness culture. Not that all wellness culture is disordered, but a lot of times, even on TikTok or influencers or things like that, I'll just see people kind of talk about things in a way where I'm going, yikes. Like, if you were in my office, I would be concerned about this thought process around food. Yeah. So I think so much gets normalized or kind of brushed under the rug, or they're able to hide it so well, right? They protect it because it's protecting them from hard emotions. So often I think there's more going on than we even realize, right?
Yeah. Well, and especially with the social media aspects of it. We had a gentleman on a couple weeks ago. Gabe and I spoke about him last week, but he's with the Tyler Hooten Foundation. They do a lot of work with MLB around steroids, which we know, right, is another huge aspect of body dysmorphia, which leads to eating disorders. And there's all kinds of stuff that comes out now. I was hearing about this one I think he calls himself the Liver King or something
Oh,
like
yes,
that. And
I
he
saw
is
that.
having all kinds of issues now outside of him, like kind of just losing touch.
Yeah.
But physically, when you see him, the distended belly and all these kind of things that are related not just to steroids, but the way in which he's consuming and excreting food, you know?
Yeah.
And this is somebody who has millions and millions of followers, you know?
And so much influence.
Right, right. So we know that it's everywhere. And, you know, we don't need to fearmonger, but we need to be aware.
Yeah.
These conversations
Yes.
have to happen.
Yes. And that's a good point. I think, like you said, where we don't want to fearmonger, because that's the thing too. I think sometimes I joke when I meet people and I'll say, you know, I'm a dietitian. I'm like, oh no, don't look at what I'm eating. And I'm like, no, I'm not that kind of dietitian. I'm an eating disorder dietitian. And then they're like, oh no, like, am I eating weird? I'm like, no, it's fine. You're good. I'm not analyzing you, I promise. But I think, yeah, so it's like, we don't have to say like, oh gosh, like everyone should be scared, but just be aware. And I just tell people, you know, that food doesn't have to be that hard. And when food starts to get hard and you feel stressed about it, or you feel stressed about body image, it doesn't have to be that hard. So when you feel kind of entrapped by it, or where it's, yeah, just feeling like this is causing a lot more stress than I feel like it should, that's a great time to seek help and just talk through it before it maybe ramps up into something bigger than it is, you know?
Yeah, and to really highlight like what I hear you sharing too, which is such a huge piece we often talk about on this show, is that one key that you touched on, which is when it gets hard, what helps simplify it is community.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's your biggest first step. I mean, there are many, many big first steps you can take, but if you can get connected with people who speak your language, they understand the struggles that you're struggling with. They are educated in how to walk you through it. And if you can have both of those pieces, your prognosis is way better.
Yeah.
Your ability to get better is much improved.
That's very true. Yeah, because those are so often, and I'm sure in your experience, in your job as well, I think I take it seriously that those sessions are times when they can talk freely. They're not going to be triggered by anything I say. All my language I'm going to use is going to be safe language and supportive language, and you know, and have someone they can talk to about things that they probably don't have a lot of space to talk about other places. And that's so I always want to take that seriously. And I think, like you said, it's then we look at, okay, who are other people in your life that can be also support outside of the session, and how can we practice talking about that? How can we practice reaching out for accountability when we need help day to day and things like that? Because silence and isolating is such a driver for keeping that eating disorder protected. Right? So
well, why would I change it if no one knows about it,
Yeah.
and no one would keep me accountable anyway?
Yeah.
Let alone keep myself accountable.
Yeah.
This one's easy to hide right now.
Yep. So if I can just tuck it away, no one's bothering me about it, then I'll be fine. And I'm doing okay right now, and everything's going to be fine until but I always say it's fine until it's not fine. you
Right.
know? So, yeah.
Yeah, the desperation catches us all.
Yeah.
You know, with these kind of behaviors, whether it be an outward consequence or what my therapist would always say in the beginning is a shame attack.
Yeah.
After you've acted out in a way that you're not proud of, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may be next year, but you will have a shame attack, you know, and that couldn't have been more true just for me personally, but it really highlighted for me a lot of the things that I witness in my clients, like, oh wow, I mean, this is kind of the consequence that they were reporting, needing to navigate through, and that happens all the time with any type of addiction.
Yeah.
It's so hidden.
Yeah, it's so hidden, right? So, but yeah, I think so often it is an interesting space a lot of times I always tell parents, because when I work with a lot of teens, so a lot of times when I'm talking with parents and things like that, and just even how to go towards those conversations, right? So they're, you know, they might want to come in and be like, did you do X, Y, and Z? And they're like, then the kids go to shutdown mode. So even knowing how to go have those conversations to help them just reach out and talk about what feelings are coming up, or if behaviors did come up, or knowing that we can talk about that, and how do we know that it's not because you're in trouble, it's because we want to help work through that, right? So that's always an interesting space too, is navigating how to have that safe dialogue and space for them in session and at home and with someone outside of just themselves.
Yeah, and the family system, and there's a lot of things I'm sure we could say about this. But since we have you here too to get your perspective and you work with it day in and day out, I know that in any of the realms I work with my clients around any type of addiction, substances, eating disorders, gambling, you name it, sex, you name it, these are deep-rooted patterns that were either observed or affected in some way in younger years that we then seek to master. And this is one aspect, right, that maybe Freud would talk about it. But I'm curious if you see that at any type of notable percentage, the way I've seen it before as well, that it could be hard to talk to the family because someone in that system is hiding with the eating disorder. And it's, I hate to say it so directly, but the way I've seen it with young girls is it's often mom, and there's a lot of unresolved anger and resentment around it from mom that makes it very hard to tackle these conversations.
Yes, yeah. It's funny you say that because I just had this conversation with a therapist today. I think that's such a big part of it because if we think about the kind of pieces that kind of etiology of eating disorders, it's genetic predisposition, right? So usually there's a family tie, right? Personality types, and then environment. So parents contribute to 2 of the 3 of those, sadly, and kind of personality is its own thing. So with that, a lot of times, there's usually going to be a parent that might have struggled with eating disorders or disordered eating, and you get kind of one of 2 things often, right? Where one, it might be one that's had it, worked through it, knows it, and is aware of it, and is like, I do not want to pass this down to my kid, or I'm so sad they're struggling because I know how hard it is. Or there'll be a parent that doesn't want to admit that they struggle, so they minimize the kid's behavior, and they're going, okay, so she didn't eat breakfast. I don't eat breakfast. You're like, well, there you go.
Right.
You should probably eat breakfast too. Yeah. So that comes up a lot. Or we want for the parents to model normalized eating for their children, right? So if your daughter or son is in recovery and they have to eat 3 meals a day and a snack after school, we want mom and dad, they don't have to be following the meal plan exactly, but at least modeling eating breakfast, having a snack when they're hungry. So when you have a parent that's not really worked through their own things and they're not able to model that, or like you said, it's bringing up so much for them because we're asking them to do something that's also really hard,
right? Then
that it does make it really complicated.
Yeah. And such is the nature in our society, which is very much other esteem. Is maybe one way we could put it, is like, this person will help me resolve this. And I think, unfortunately, and we say this with grace and compassion, but I think a lot of parents unconsciously utilize their kids for that external coping, right? They'll help me feel better. Here's a nice little gift for you. We call it trauma.
Packaged nicely. To bring that up with your therapist.
Open that on like your 25th or 26th birthday.
Hold on to that for a little bit longer until you're out of the house.
And it's a struggle, but I think there's a lot of hope in it too, especially these days. I think people are much more aware. Which has its problems. We've talked about them a lot on this show with the social media aspects of it. But there's a lot of hope that people are like, hey, I have more and more younger clients that come in every year where it's like, wow, I mean, to do this at 18 is pretty brave.
Really impressive. It is interesting. Like you said, I think what you said about a lot of parents are, I forgot the exact wording you used, but where they're kind of managing their own feelings around the eating stuff through their kids, right? Or kind of normalizing it through their kids. And I think that's a really tough one and that's when I really try to work with great therapists and get parents in therapy or family therapy, whatever it might be, because I do think there's so many attachment things that go on. And I think parents just really have to analyze what's going on internally as well as what's going on with their child. And it's a lot to analyze at once.
And most people, I would say, probably won't do it.
No.
It reminds me, there's this great movie. I watched it for the first time the other night. It's called Girl Interrupted with Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie. And there's this scene, I was cracking up, where Winona's sitting there with her mom and dad, and the mom's like, what is borderline personality disorder? And they're explaining how, like, typically it's learned behaviors from someone who has borderline, and I'm also like, I can't do this.
And did they explain it well? in the
Yeah, it was
movie? Like,
very,
did you
yeah, it
feel
was
like,
very clinical. I mean,
wow.
for the time, you know, it was in the
Yeah.
60s, so
Yeah.
we would explain maybe borderline slightly differently.
Yeah, we made
and
some
more,
progress
yeah,
there, but
there's more containment in the
yes.
understanding of that
Yeah.
disorder now, where
That
it's
is
like,
so interesting.
we don't just say one of the symptoms is a promiscuous young woman anymore, but, you know, things like
We've
that.
matured our language a little bit,
Yeah.
so that's good. So,
Yeah. But I thought that presentation, because working
yeah.
in treatment, I used to see that all
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. I don't want to have this conversation. It's
Yeah.
like, I mean, all right.
Okay.
I'm not here to force
It's going to
you.
have to come up at some point.
Right.
Either it's coming up in this conversation or it's coming up in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, and like you were highlighting, it's coming up in your child's
Yeah.
behavior, right? And
Yeah.
that's why it's so important.
Yeah, that's so funny.
So you do a lot of work with teens.
Yeah, so I do a lot of work with teens. I really enjoy working with teens because I think I really enjoy working with the parent system or family system as we're talking about it. Because I think that with teens, there's such hope. Not that there's less hope at an older age, but I think you're catching them at a time when it's like you have all of this support and we can really catch this early and like really let's figure out how to shift this so this doesn't interfere with college, this doesn't interfere with you going into your adulthood or whatever that might be. So it's cool to just know, hey, we're going to catch this now, and also helping parents because I think it's so hard, right, as a parent and a caregiver to be walking through this journey with your child, right, and like, you know, we have those parents who are very avoidant, and maybe don't jump in, and then the parents that really do, I always tell them like, I'm seeing your child 1 hour every week, and you're having to do this all day, every day, and sometimes create a pseudo treatment setup at home where you're monitoring breakfast and you're monitoring snack and you're monitoring lunch and you're making sure they're not working out and you're making sure they're not going to the bathroom after meals and you're making sure they're not weighing themselves. So much to monitor, right? So I really try to help parents, one, kind of find ways to find some kind of balance. Like you just can't always do it all and it's not perfect and that's okay. And give yourself grace of this is a lot of work and it's really hard, you know?
Yeah. Because even listening to it, I work with a lot of family members of alcoholics. And so the first recommendation we make there is to get themselves into Al-Anon and to start to detach, right? And that's an aggressive in your face kind of detachment, right? Like I can't be involved really at all with the addiction. Eating disorders are unique in this sense, where some of them are. Eating disorders certainly are, where it's you as a parent you kind of have to be involved. Whereas if your kid's slamming heroin or drinking alcohol, we need to get you detached from trying to enable and help and fix and save. Where with an eating disorder, we're trying to how would I say this? We're trying to accomplish that too, while also creating the healthy system that our dietitians are giving. Because you have to be hands-on with eating disorders, because if you don't, they're not gonna.
That is I've never thought about it that way, but that's so true where we think about, if you're working with addiction, it's probably a little bit more, we got to take the hands off, right? And not enable you and not be kind of coddling you through this process, right? Or with eating disorders, especially the really, really young ones or the teens, the parents are having to jump in because, I tell them like, eventually we'll work on autonomy and independence and their own self-accountability. And I would love to get there with you. I always tell them that, like, that is a goal. Your parents, I'm sure that's a goal for them too. But for now, like, we have to show that we're able to loosen the grips a little bit of the support and accountability. So but it can be a lot initially for them because you're managing everything and just the stress. If they're at school now, we have to have announcement at school is to make sure they're eating their lunch at school, and if they have a snack at school, then we have to make sure they're doing that. If they go to friends, it's a lot, right? So it's just can be overwhelming. So
it's it's a traditional system of boundaries, right? And no matter which angle that we come from, if the adults in the environment, and maybe this is a take home on this aspect for people listening, is without intact, healthy boundaries for the adult in their care for themselves, it's going to make it really hard to delineate the lines that we're talking about between things like a structured system that a dietitian gives you and detachment.
Yes.
You may feel a little bit even listening to this if these are things you're struggling with, where it's like, God, they must be on Mars. What are they talking about?
What's going
like,
on here?
Yeah, and you'd be in good company. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember I felt that way. Like,
Yeah.
what are these therapists talking about?
What is all this stuff?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's an interesting thing too with the boundaries piece. I'll give you one example. I had a parent, and we talked about, we have the structure of like we're doing supportive meals. Breakfast is at this time, and then her daughter was like, "Well, I'm just going to do breakfast at like 5:30 before y'all wake up." And she was like, "Well, now the mom called me and she's like, so I got to wake up at 5:30." And I said, "No, you don't. No. You're waking up at 6:30 like you normally do. She can eat breakfast at 6:45 when you eat breakfast and you are there. You don't have to change your day for her eating disorder to dictate what you do, right?" So that's where that boundary. So it is an interesting, and that's a hard balance because the mom was like, "I just wanted to eat breakfast, and if I have to wake up at 5:30 every day, I'll wake up at 5:30 every day. I don't care." But I had to remind her. I was like, she's just trying to avoid, right? And you just have to be like, breakfast is at 6:45. It is what it is, So it's an interesting and complicated balance to have to be so hands-on and also set boundaries with it, right? And it's a lot.
Yeah, because as I'm listening to you, it's all right. The healthy side of it, in which we're presenting, is the flip side of the coin of the ambivalence that someone with an eating disorder and the system around any addiction is dealing with, which is, will I or won't I?
Yes.
And in order to make that decision, it's either I believe I'm a good person and I'm going to do these things, or I'm a piece of shit and I'm going to have fun, right? And it's like either one has consequences, and people sit in the middle ground, right?
Yes.
And when the adult does it with enabling, they're not malicious. They don't mean, right? It's like when she called the dietitian and was like, "So what? I have to get up at 5:30?" It's like those are those moments as a therapist I love of like reflecting it back. Like, you hear that you're asking somebody else permission to do something that you don't even want to do. I mean, it kind of starts to sound insane, right? Right, where it's like, no, of course you don't have to get up at 5:30. They're the child.
And that's so funny because I was saying, this mom, she's great, and she was like, "You're right." She was like, "As I say this, I can't believe I'm asking this." I was like, I get it. Like, they back in a corner to make you feel like you are having to do this. But once you say it out loud and I reflect back, they're like, "Oh yeah, I don't have to do that. What a relief." Like, it's okay. Oh yeah, it's funny.
And it's best that we don't, because there's only a natural conclusion with that is resentment. You don't want to get up at 5:30, but you don't want them to be getting away with quote unquote anything. So now you're getting up at 5:30, you're pissed at them, but you don't realize that what you're really pissed at is the pattern in which has replayed probably for generations. Right? That was something, I mean, recently I was confronted with this, but I learned in my recovery was I was always so pissed that the alcoholic could get away with shit that I couldn't get away with. And I was just resentful. Right? I didn't want to go on benders. I didn't want to drink like they do, but I wanted to be able to get away with shit maybe like they do. And I could never understand, like, we were joking about this the other night of the alcoholic will come tiptoeing in your room while you're asleep and go into your wallet and slip the money out, take your keys, get in your car, drive down the street, crash into a wall, leave your car, and you find them at the bar. And they'll get away with all of it up to a certain point. And I'm the kind of motherfucker, when I walk in the room, I'm going to stub my toe on the bed. And I'm pissed that that's who
I can't get away with anything.
And it wasn't until the realization of some of these things, and I think a lot of times for families of like, oh, I'm not actually resentful at that person. I think I'm maybe lacking tolerance. I have a fair amount of jealousy, maybe even entitlement, which stings, right? I am entitled to be pissed at you. And it's like, no, you're not. Right? We have to turn that over. We got to let go of it, or it'll pull you through all the weeds.
And that's an interesting thing you say, because that comes up a lot with clients too of, if someone's, let's say, oh, well, I went to work and someone's talking about a diet or like how they're losing weight, and I'm so mad because I can't get on a diet, or I can't intentionally lose weight or go on a weight loss, whatever it might be, fill in the blank. But it's that frustration they feel of like, I should be able to do that too. But I always have to remind them, like, let's go down that road. We're trying to lose weight. What's it going to look like in a month? What's it going to look like in 2 months? And then like, I know. I'm like, I know what you're doing. It's going to be bad. I'm like, yes, So it's just, but it's at accepting like that's not a safe thing for me to do, and that's just is what it is. For me to keep myself mentally, physically, and emotionally safe, I cannot dabble in dieting or being rigid about eating or obsessive about exercise. I just have, there might just be boundaries that are set in place for a while and forever, and that's just how it has to be. So
and they morph, right? It becomes less. This is something too where I've had a handful of people I've worked with for years, and to watch the progressions in their recoveries, whether it be heroin or alcohol or food or whatever it is. In the beginning, you think it's always going to be about the thing. And when you stick with the boundaries and you stick with maybe your spiritual fitness, however they identify with it, and you stick with community, it becomes about the threads underneath, the way you handle your shame, the way you handle not just the triggers in the way we talk about them on a colloquial community sense, but the way you've been saying you handle the difficulties. There's that famous section in the big book, acceptance was the answer, right? It's like when you accept that this is just something you're powerless over, right? I guess the only other thing I'd say on that is there's a book called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck, and the first line of the book says, life is suffering. That's it, period. And then it's like a way down the page and he starts writing the book. And it's just like, these are just the truths of life. When you embrace it, it gets a lot easier.
That's so true.
And you were highlighting that right off the jump. It's like, it doesn't have to be so complicated.
Yes. And we make it more complicated than it has to be so often, right? So it's like giving ourselves permission. And it is that interesting space of just being human and living life, is that life is hard, right? And there's some parts of it that we have to maybe have specific boundaries for ourselves, or whatever that might be, or specific struggles that someone else might not struggle with in the same way, and that's just reality of it, right? And at the same time, sometimes those boundaries that feel so in the moment, let's say one of my patients, we're saying like these boundaries of like not over-exercising or not purging or not restricting or X, Y, and Z, initially they're like, oh my gosh, these are so debilitating. Like these boundaries feel so, I feel like stuck and paralyzed in them, right? When in reality it's like, but it allows you this freedom once we get over this hurdle and how hard it is initially, and we get through the hard part, you will get to the other side and realize there's freedom in you setting these boundaries for yourself, because then you're free from that eating disorder having that stronghold, right? So I always tell them that there's this kind of false sense of control they have when they're in their eating disorder, and I'm sure with addictions probably similar to that, where life feels out of control, life feels chaotic. That's why COVID was such an upheaval in eating disorders. When we feel out of control in our whatever life situations might be, then the eating disorder is where we can really access control over our food, our body, whatever it might be. So then they're like, okay, well, if you take this eating disorder away if I let this eating disorder go, things are going to be out of control. But then we have to look at, I always help them kind of try to help them zoom out and say like, but it's actually created so much chaos for you. You think it's helping you be in control, but this has created like a whole new level of chaos. Like you have now had to be pulled out of school, or you can't work, or you're not able to engage with your social life or whatever it might be. But it's so hard to see it when you're in that prison, right? You just see it as like, if I let this go, everything's going to fall apart because it's the only thing I'm holding on to. But if we just get past, like, we gotta let it go. There's so much freedom outside of it, right? But it's hard to see when you're in it.
It's the self-imposed trap of self-indulgence, self-pity, and self-righteousness, right? And you get back in that corner like, nice and tight.
I'm stuck here.
I always envision like, I just know for myself, it's like I'm a big dude, right? And I was like a little cat in the back of the cage. Like, if you give me an inch, I might run past you, but I'm going to stay back here until then, right? And it was entitlement and self-righteousness and self-pity and self-indulgence, right? It makes me think, as you were talking about it, there's a concept in Tradition 6 in the recovery rooms around, not endorsing outside entities and remaining anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, right? And there's this aspect in the nuance of it where when AA was first a thing, they started to gain all this clout, and then they had opportunities to go out in the community, and they had all kinds of ideas. Maybe we'll start hospitals, and we'll endorse this and that and the third, and we'll solve problems in politics because we've got the answer. And you're reading this in the 12 and 12, and it's like, well, there's that self-indulgent bullshit, right? The actual trap and the freedom that you were highlighting, right? Is when you get past that, you realize how much you had stolen your life away from yourself. And the rest that remains is acceptance and freedom, if you want it.
Yeah. If you allow yourself to have that without those, that's so funny. But it really is, what did you say? Self-righteousness, self-indulgence, and that really sums it up. Right? How we keep ourselves stuck with those being such main emotions or main drives, and how we keep ourselves stuck so often and then get frustrated that we're stuck in the trap we've created. So, well,
and even as you were saying in the beginning, how relational eating disorders are, right? Because the threads, as I'm listening to you, it's like all the other ways in which the eating disorder is the sense of control is so that I don't have to feel the unmanageable relationships, right? That's the maybe definitely not the only layer, but that's one of the big first ones. It is almost hard to distinguish, like, are these happening at the same time?
Yeah. And I think so often, like, there's so much vulnerability in relationships, right? So like you were saying, it almost is kind of the either or, where I think sometimes staying in the eating disorder, it can become, like, I'll kind of describe it as like a toxic boyfriend or something, like a toxic partner. So it's like you're toxic. So we'll kind of personify the eating disorder in some ways, depending on how that it presents for a certain patient, right? So we'll talk about a lot of times, like, it's like a toxic partner. Like, it tells you how amazing you are, and then it, like, makes you feel horrible about yourself, makes you do horrible things to yourself, and does horrible things to you. So it's this constant cycle of, like, it's almost like being with a narcissist or something, right? But it's almost too sometimes how sometimes clients will talk about it. It's where that relationship, it's hard to prioritize other relationships over it. It almost feels like a toxic partner who's like, you can't have any other friends. I'm jealous of them. No, they're just bad for you, whatever. And it really almost, they feel like this, that they can't pour into other relationships because that's going to be bad or damage that relationship with the eating disorder. So it's really interesting to kind of see that play out, right? And it's like, it's hard to have authentic relationships when you're really deep in that eating disorder. It's hard to really present authentically and vulnerably. And in order to build relationships, we have to have vulnerability, right? So if you have a friend and they're like, you're opening up to them all the time and they're shutting down and not allowing that for themselves, it's hard to feel a closeness. So it keeps them safe from having to be vulnerable. But then once again, it's the same trap we create for ourselves. Without a vulnerability and the fear, that scary part of vulnerability, we don't get to have relationships that are actually really freeing and loving and wonderful. So it's the trade-off we create for ourselves. So
the long-lasting stuff, the healthy stuff,
the good stuff that you want to have for, like, decades of time.
I spend time, especially with my female clients these days. I have a handful of them that I love. They crack me up. I have a couple of them that are tattoo artists, and they love a bad boy, and as I'm listening to you, there's an aspect with eating disorders, addictions. If it's like any good, fun, toxic relationship, that you get to be the victim, right? and that's that part where it's like, it's when we're breaking cycles, right, of these things, it's understanding the difference between a one up and a one down. Right. And every relationship has the opportunity for that to present itself. Even in healthy ones, we get caught up in these things and we step back and assess and then come back to vulnerability and repair. Right. But in the toxic relationship, it's somebody is on the pedestal and somebody is the victim. All right. And what I think in eating disorders, what I've always noticed, like any addiction, is that the person, when they're in that victim with the eating disorder, don't realize that that's the actual power, because at any point they can knock it off and now I'm the best thing ever. And anytime I've worked with addictions, it's like, oh, I'm doing great, everything is great, the pink cloud, right? It's like, that is, you've now knocked the pedestal off the eating disorder and you're the greatest thing ever, and the eating disorder is the victim waiting to take you out. and it's better than you at
And
doing
it's strong.
it. Yeah.
And it's, yeah, that is so interesting. I like that analogy. I've never really thought about it in that way, but it's such a helpful way because I think similarly to addiction, sometimes with eating disorders, though, we'll be doing good and we're like, great, like everything's going well. And it's like, I'm fine. I'm doing amazing. I think I'm done with sessions. And I always say, that's fine. Just like, don't lose my number,
Right.
always here. Because like you get relaxed and we're like, then we start just being like, I'm fine. But that eating disorder, it's like waiting in the corner just to attack whenever it sees a vulnerable moment, right? Just to get, like you said, just to shift that power dynamic again.
Yeah. It was that analogy before the show when we were talking about the lion in the cage when you reach your hand and it'll bite your hand off.
Yes.
That's the eating disorder.
Yes.
And I always try to when we're personifying things like you were talking about, like with my eating disorder clients, is that's not you. With predominantly right now I work with females who have eating disorders in those realms, and you're that little girl that's scared, right? Because you're in a cage with a fucking lion.
Yeah.
I'd be scared too,
Like, no
and I'm
wonder
a
you're
grown
scared.
man. Yeah. Yeah. But this is, I think most people are wandering through life. One of my friends always says, like, we need to get hit in the head by a clue by four. We need to, and sometimes we got to get hit over and over. And like you were saying in the beginning, that's okay. We're going to have these conversations over and over, but you don't have to be that scared little girl anymore, because you're not anymore. And teenagers, right, male or female, that's when we kind of start to become that more autonomous. The world can't just happen to you as much as it used to, and so now you have more say. I'm sure there's a million other ways we could put that.
That's so interesting. And I think that's I talk a lot with parents about this, like you were saying, where the eating disorder is not really you or that patient or client. So I'll talk about this a lot with parents. So, we'll start out, and usually, especially a lot of my clients that maybe are on the really over-controlled side, like really type A, really over-controlled, really perfectionistic. They're like always been great kids, always, doing amazing in school, respectful of their parents, just normal, happy, pretty good kids. And then when the eating disorder comes in, we'll start out sessions and they'll be like, oh yeah, they love their sessions. They're doing great. Everything's good. I'm like, cool. And I always warn parents, I'm like, this is going to be like 3 weeks. And then when things get really hard, they're going to hate me. They're going to be so mad at you every time you tell them to eat. And they're going to be really difficult to live with. And I need you to be prepared for that. It's going to happen.
Yes.
And when they say that I'm a terrible person and they hated sessions, just be like, okay, I'm doing something right, because they're mad. Because the eating disorder is, we've put salt in the wound of that eating disorder, and it's really flaring up because we keep poking at it. We're poking at the bear, poking the lion, and now it's fighting us back, right? So always have, and parents are always like, she's not usually like this. I'm like, I know. It's okay. I know this is not how your daughter usually acts, but her eating disorder is upset, and it's fighting back, and it's getting grumpy, and it's getting mad, and it's getting feisty every time you ask her to eat snack or whatever. So I think sometimes that helps parents too, because it's just sad for them to watch their kid be so stressed and also present in a way that they're not used to. But sometimes I'm like, this will pass. This is not going to be forever. It doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing by setting boundaries and expecting to, and having consistent expectations of them. You just got to get through this hard part, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough.
The flare up is coming.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a sign of any good work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It reminds me, and I want to make sure, because we're going to be coming to the end here pretty soon, I want to make sure that we, at least in today's conversation, get a definition of ARFID for the viewers. But it reminds me, as you were telling me that, it's like I had a couple recently come in and they were seeking someone who's an expert in addictions, right? And they had come in and they had some gripes about the previous therapist, and I'm taking it all in, listening, right? And it's like, oh, that's probably a sign that they were poking at something, that was hurtful to them. And of course, it's the female partner wants the sessions because the male partner is struggling in his addiction. And the very next session after we start, I'm on partner, the female partner, to get into Al-Anon.
Yeah.
And of course, right, the flare-ups come. Right, I don't
Mm-hmm.
like that. I don't like that program. I don't want to do that. I've tried it. I'm not doing right.
Mm-hmm.
And I had told her in the first session, I said, you're not going to like my recommendations.
Yeah.
All right, but you know, if you don't like them that much, then maybe I'm not the provider for you,
Like
and
this
that's okay.
might not be a good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. Yeah, you start to see that pushback, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the pushback comes in, and sometimes, yeah, like I always tell parents, like if they're just think our sessions are the most fun, then you probably shouldn't be paying me, because
Yeah.
if I'm really pushing back on the, like, and I always want to make sure we build rapport, and I always, you know, try to
course.
bring in some humor, like connection, because I want them to feel safe and all the things. But if they just like love our goals every week, then I'm like, maybe I'm not pushing them hard enough.
Yeah.
It seems too comfortable. Like,
Right.
we need to maybe shake things up a little bit, and that's okay, you
Yeah.
know. So
I always think of it in the sense of sufficient challenge.
yes,
Right. You know, I'm not going to ask a 5-year-old to go out in the backyard and build a shed. I'm going to ask him to choose his outfit.
yes, yes. I love that sufficient challenge. Yeah, I always kind of say, yeah, we're gonna. And I always tell patients too, like, you can talk to me if like something feels like impossible. We can talk through that. So maybe we kind of bring it down on the anxiety scale of exposures, or we talk through how we can help you do that exposure that feels too hard right now, right? So it's not like a black and white thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. You specialize in an acronym that I've heard many times, definitely not an expert myself. We want to make sure
Yes.
that they get at least a definition of it. These are conversations where when we link your stuff, you guys can go and find Maggie's information and get more information on ARFID. But how would you define it for somebody who's listening along with us tonight?
Yeah, so ARFID is it is considered an eating disorder. The way that it stands out from other eating disorders, that it is not driven by body image. So it is not tied. ARFID is not driven by body image distress, right? So it might look similarly in the sense of there might be weight loss or low body weight, restrictive intake, but how it kind of develops, or the 3 subtypes that we look at, the most common being the extreme picky eating. So that tends to be due to texture or taste aversion. So they might be really highly sensitive to certain textures. So they might tell me, like, I really hate like chewy textures, or textures of chicken might be, or meats will be really difficult, or textures of like fruits and veggies will be really difficult. That's pretty common. The taste avoidance tends to be, sometimes they're super tasters where they just have a heightened awareness of certain taste. So they might just get really overwhelmed by certain tastes and overstimulated by certain taste or textures. So that's kind of the one I see most often, is just the extreme picky eating. With those clients, oftentimes they're going to probably attach more to, or their safe foods might tend to be more processed or packaged foods. And I always give the example, like if you had goldfish versus blueberries, like if I have a pack of goldfish, they're probably going to taste about the same. Every goldfish is maybe one's saltier, maybe one's crunchier, overall pretty similar.
Yeah.
Versus if I get a carton of blueberries, there could be a squishy one, there could be like a sour one, there could be a sweet one, and it's a surprise. So if you have a really heightened awareness to taste or textures, a carton of blueberries is like a whole journey, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what you're going to get. So I always say, so oftentimes they'll come to me and they'll be like, they're only eating packaged foods, and that's their safe foods, and they can't eat anything that's not like processed or prepackaged. So we tend to work on how can we increase intake in the sense of where are we having nutritional gaps, and where is quality of life suffering. So would it be helpful to be able to go out to eat to a restaurant? Okay, can we find one thing that we can eat at a restaurant? Are we lacking protein sources? How can we add in protein sources? So that's most common. Second would be the fear of adverse consequences. That tends to be fear of something, maybe like fear of vomiting, fear of choking, maybe a fear of getting food poisoning. Sometimes that can be tied to maybe OCD, so like especially the food poisoning. So if there's like a heightened like almost OCD checking around like food safety things, that can kind of present like ARFID with the food Ps. The fear of choking or vomiting tends to come from a traumatic event. So it might be they, choked on a grape or something when they were little and it was really traumatic, or saw someone throw up. So that would be where I would work on a lot of the exposure stuff, and then we would have a therapist working on trauma. So one of my therapist I work with a lot does EMDR, so they might do
Yeah.
some trauma work around that event, depending on age, what's appropriate. The third one, final, is lack of interest in eating, and that's where they might just, their body just doesn't cue them as strongly as you or I might be cued for food. So I'll give the example, like if I'm gonna go get Mexican food tonight, I'm thinking about it all day. When I walk in the restaurant, I smell the food, I'm getting excited, and my body's like prepping for it. And I'm getting those positive reinforcements from that excitement around it. For those clients, they might just not ever really have that heightened excitement around food, and food might always, in some capacity, be a little bit just routine for them, like taking their vitamins. That one's probably the one I see the least, but yeah, so it's those three subtypes. So how you would typically see it present is if they're tend to gravitate towards processed foods, really struggle with meat textures or fruits or veggies, heightened awareness around taste or texture is a big piece, and if they might just not show a lot of excitement or interest in eating or trying new foods. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
I might have some ARFID around ketchup.
Yes. I know usually everyone's
hate
like,
ketchup.
I think I have I know I have a texture thing on cottage cheese. That's my one. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
can't do it. So I've tried it several ways. I can't do it. So.
And ARFID, for those listening, it stands for.
Oh, yes. So avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder.
Right.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. But it's an interesting thing. And if you, it's a newer diagnosis as well. I want to say, like, it really only came into the DSM like in the last 10 to 15 years. So if you feel like you do know someone, you yourself or someone, a child or whatever it might be, a partner, it can be hard to find providers who specialize. So if you go to the doctor, especially, you know, a lot of my clients, maybe if they went to the doctor 20, 15, 10 years ago, or even like this year, the doctor might just be like, you got to eat more, whatever. Or might say, they'll grow out of it, it's fine. They'll eventually, kids are picky. But if you feel like, okay, they're not growing out of it, I can't just get them to eat more, that would be a good time to look into just checking in with someone that's an ARFID specialist and seeing if that might be what's coming up for them.
Yeah.
So.
And Maggie will be tagged in all of our social media posts and the YouTube. So if this is something you're struggling with, obviously Maggie Stenson can help you.
Yeah.
We have one question that we ask the guests at the end of every show.
Yes.
We're going to build a mental health amusement park, and you get to build a ride there. What would the ride be? What would it do? What would you call it?
Oh, I was just talking about Candyland with the patient. That's so random. We're talking about like old board games. I feel like just because I work in eating disorders, like having some like fun, positive, like food ride, like making like a Candyland ride, just because, you know, kind of connecting, like bringing joy into food and bringing excitement and like making it fun. So I would probably do like a Candyland roller coaster type thing.
What would you call it?
Oh, that's a good question. I was trying to think if I could do like alliteration, but like Candy Castle or something. I also like Disney World, so I'm like, what if I could do a Disney thing?
Yeah.
So one or the other. Maybe a Disney Candyland ride.
Nice.
Bring the two together.
Yeah.
So.
I like it. Cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Maggie Stenson, registered dietitian. We break the cycle here every Friday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We won't see you next week because it's July 4th and I'm going to be blowing shit up, but we will see you next Thursday on the 3rd. We love you. Take care.